Originally released on the Sharp X68000 way back in 1994, Mad Stalker Full Metal Force was a remake for the PlayStation 1 and was a side-scrolling beat-em-up that shared much in common with the likes of Final Fight, but instead of beating down groups of street punks, they were instead replaced with robots. Set far into the future, you take on the role of a police officer who controls a mech suit that's capable of various feats and tackle the ever-growing threat from a rogue AI that's taken over many of the other robots originally built for defense. Now when it comes to gameplay, your mech suit allows you to punch, kick, sweep, dash attack, throw enemies, and fire a plasma rifle for its basic moves. You do have a special move as well though, and results in you being able to release a cloud of explosions that cover about half of the screen. This option really comes in handy when you're being absolutely swarmed by enemies in the field, as well as the far more demanding boss encounters. Now the enemies consist of about 7 or so various robots, but the bosses get special treatment with distinct attack patterns and abilities that require a lot more strategy to overcome. Now one aspect of the game that stands out to me are the visuals. There's some really impressive sprite work in the mix that brings with it some gorgeous animation that's unique to each enemy and boss. The same can be said for the backgrounds, which are constantly changing and never stagnant as you make your way through the city. From the bustling downtown area to the industrial slums that serve as the underbelly of the town, it's clear a lot of love and attention went into the visuals, even if they are a bit crude by today's standards. Despite its age and short length, it is very much worth adding Mad Stalker Full Metal Force to your library, and if you're a fan of the beat-em-up genre, you will more than likely enjoy it just as much as I did. The PlayStation was no stranger to light gun games. The likes of Point Blank and Time Crisis filling the ranks, it would come at no surprise that some other efforts simply didn't get their time in the spotlight. One of these games is Elemental Gearball, that offered up a unique take on the usual setup you'd see elsewhere. This came in the form of several RPG elements that revolved around leveling up your character by collecting points during each stage, which could then be put towards dealing heavier amounts of damage or increasing the amount of health for your character. There were two main ways to do this. The obvious was taking out as many enemies as possible, which rewarded you with a multiplier for each and every one that falls. The second sees you focusing on floating green orbs that when taken down release a fairy held within, and at the end of each level the amount that you've saved gets added to the enemies you've defeated and further increases your chances of leveling up. Of course, it's not just simply about blasting away at anything that moves, as there's a severe amount of strategy involved in doing so as well. Like the name suggests, several elements play a key role during play, which comes in the form of different types of ammo for specific types of enemies. This constant juggle between identifying the right type of ammo for which type of enemy will keep you on your toes as you make your way through each stage. It can get really frantic at points, but that's where most of the fun is found, especially in those moments where you barely make it through. But with enough practice and making sure that you're utilizing all of the tools at your fingertips, it soon becomes a much more enjoyable experience. With its engrossing gameplay, beautiful visuals, and surprisingly deep story, Elemental Gearball is essential for fans of the light gun genre, so if you see it on the cheap, it is well worth adding to your collection. When it comes to Bomberman, the racing genre is probably the last thing that will pop into your mind, but this little gem is quite possibly one of the most unique races you'll ever play on the system. First off, you're not going to be jumping into a vehicle, but instead riding on these bunny or hippo-like creatures that race around a bunch of tracks, throwing bombs and power-ups at each other. When it comes to gameplay, like many racing games, it's all set up into a series of modes, with the most prominent being the championship. Here you'll find various races to overcome, set across a diverse set of locations and tracks that naturally escalate in difficulty the further you progress. Once you hit the road though, it's not all just about trying to reach first position on your racing skill alone, as the power-ups on offer are incredibly useful and have a huge role to play. They range from the standards such as bombs and basic boosts to the more absurd, like letting your animal relieve themselves on the road. This cheeky nature rings throughout the entire game and adds a nice amount of levity to each race. Another aspect that helps the gameplay shine are the range of shortcuts littered around each track, which ultimately reward those that take the time to learn each of the routes, entrancing the competition as a result. Visually, it's nothing that's going to blow you away, but the simple and basic polygons manage to convey a sort of cartoon aesthetic that plays into the vibrant nature of the game as a whole. Now, there's only one main issue that I found, and that's the lack of analog control. Unfortunately, you only have the option to use the D-pad, which might turn some players off. And even more bizarre is that there's an actual rumble paintball feature included for those with a DualShock. So why not implement analog control as well? It just doesn't make sense. Regardless of some of the game's bizarre choices, I had a great time playing through it, and I can thoroughly recommend it for those looking for a game that can appeal to players of all ages and skill levels. Digimon World 2 is one of those games you're either going to love or hate with a passion. It's essentially an RPG that sees players taking on the role of a new Digimon trainer who must choose from one of 3 different clans. The clan you choose will decide your first Digimon, and then you'll be allowed to travel through different areas on the world map. But this is where many might get turned off, as each level is essentially a maze-like environment, each filled with an assortment of Digimon, traps and treasure to acquire. It all sounds like fun, but what hampers the experience is the slow means of traveling through each level. Rather than exploring on foot, you instead navigate each maze through the use of your Digibuggy that runs on energy points. Each step you take costs one of these points, and if you run out, you're sent back to the hub area and you've got to try again. On one hand, this affords the game an extreme amount of strategy when it comes to planning your runs, but at the same time, it might discourage those that would prefer the freedom to explore at their own pace. Thankfully though, the battles and collecting aspect of the game more than makes up for it. There's an absolute ton of Digimon to collect, who each possess their own unique movesets and characteristics, and as you would expect, there's a leveling up system in place as well that allows your team to grow and eventually evolve into completely different beasts altogether. It's here where the game really comes into its own and offers an incredible amount of replayability when it comes to trying to build the perfect team. Visually, there's both positives and negatives. Firstly, when outside of battle during exploration, it is shockingly basic, but once you get into battle, the 3D models of each monster, and especially their moves, really stand out. As a result, this will no doubt draw you into each encounter even more. So if you're a fan of Digimon, this one is a no-brainer, but for fans of RPGs in general, it might end up being a bit of a mixed bag. Project Horn Owl is an on-rail shooter that takes place in the futuristic city of Metro. As the player, you take control of one of 2 police officers who are tasked with taking out a deadly organization known as Metallica. They've set loose a series of mechanical robots on the city, which have been wreaking havoc and all but taken over the area. So it's up to you to make your way through the 5 levels that make up the game and mop up their forces before the city becomes fully under their control. Now, the best way to play this game would have to be with a light gun. Sure, you have the option to play with a controller, but as a result, the somewhat slow input speed exponentially increases the difficulty. When it comes to the shooting, it's not simply all about mashing a button, as a simple tap performs a shot, but if you hold it in for a short amount of time, you'll execute a wide shot, which has the potential to hit more than one enemy, as well as offering a higher amount of damage. Switching between these quick shots and utilizing the power-up option lends a welcome amount of strategy to each level, with taking advantage of both becoming essential during the boss encounters. Now, for anime fans, Project Horned Owl will likely bring fond memories of Ghost in the Shell and even Appleseed to mind, as artist Masamune Shiro was involved in each of the character and enemy designs, as well as the animated cutscenes that play out between levels. It's a neat little touch that helps ground the experience and helps convey its story in a very meaningful way. Now, when it comes to visuals, each of the environments are presented in 3D, with textured map cityscapes populated by sprite-based enemies, minus the bosses, which are fully 3D models. This approach to the visual design gives the game a distinct look and charm that helps it stand out amongst the other like-owned games on the system. If you're looking for something that's easy to pick up and play but also provides a decent amount of challenge, then Project Horn Owl is well worth checking out. The PlayStation was home to several incredible fighting games that pushed the genre forward in meaningful ways. The likes of Tekken and Street Fighter flourished on the system, but for every game that succeeds, there's always one that goes by unnoticed, and The Last Blade was one of them. Like many SNK fighters, Last Blade uses a 4-button configuration. There's a weak slash, heavy slash, kick and repel button. Now those first 3 are nothing you haven't seen before, but the repel mechanic really stands out. It's kind of like parrying from Street Fighter 3, except far more effective and easier to employ. Basically, pushing the button makes your fighter execute a quick defensive stance, and if they're attacked, they'll bat their opponent's weapon away. This results in you having the upper hand because your opponent will be momentarily stunned, giving you an opportunity to throw in one of your attacks or combos. That's not all though, as before each fight you have the option of choosing 2 different styles of play. You'll have the choice of either power or speed mode. Power mode makes your fighter's moves and strikes far stronger and unlocks the power to execute their super super moves. Speed, on the other hand, enables you to quickly link your attacks together for long, lightning-fast combos. It's a good idea to try out both and see which one suits your style of play, as they differ quite drastically. Now, one of the most standout aspects of the game are the visuals. Each of the characters are represented through some incredible sprite work, but it's mostly the backgrounds that truly impress. This is backed up by a solid frame rate that never buckles regardless of the action on screen, which helps the Last Blade truly excel in this area. If you've run out of fighting games to try on the PlayStation 1, then the Last Blade is definitely worth picking up and giving a go. Its lush visuals, stellar gameplay, and generous replayability make it an absolute must. The likes of Wipeout and Twisted Metal were the gold standard when it came to combat racing on the PlayStation 1. A lesser-known offering known as Red Asphalt, though, was just as good, but never managed to reach the same heights of its contemporaries and unfortunately fell into obscurity. As with most games of this kind, you'll mainly find yourself tackling the robust championship mode, which is the real meat and potatoes of the experience. The sheer amount of tracks available in the game is a real standout, with at least 6 variations for each area, such as a futuristic Los Angeles to the more exotic, like the hell-ridden world of Farcon. All of them are sure to keep you on your toes as you make your way through the game, thanks to the incredible design of each track. Now, what helps Red Asphalt excel even further is the sheer amount of weapons available and the way in which you acquire them. From plasma guns to oil slicks and even napalm, there's a huge range of options when it comes to tackling each of your opponents. But of course, you could have all of the weapons in the world, but if your racing skill isn't up to scratch, it wouldn't matter one bit. If you manage to win races, you gain experience points that can be used to increase your amount of damage and targeting accuracy, as well as being rewarded cash, which is the way for you to gain new weapons, armor, and entirely new cars altogether. This sense of progression is what will really compel players to make their way through the game, as you are constantly being fed new ways in which to approach each race, which really helps keep the game fresh and exciting. The variety of weaponry and level design is what really helps Red Asphalt shine, without replacing the primary goal of just driving like hell. So if you've exhausted the likes of Wipeout and are looking to jump into something similar, then Red Asphalt is a game that truly deserves a spot in any PlayStation fan's collection. Fighting games were a huge part of the PlayStation's success and catapulted the genre into the mainstream by proving that the arcade experience could be translated to the home environment perfectly. The likes of Dead or Alive or Tekken and Bloody Roar made a huge impact when they released, but one fighter that never reached the same heights of notoriety would have to be Critical Blow. As with all fighting games, there's a nice variety of different characters to try out, and as you would expect, they all come along with their own moves as well as both pros and cons. From heavy hitters to quick and nimble movers, it's worth taking the time to see which style of combatant suits your approach to fighting games. Naturally, the game is split up into a series of modes, with the main attraction being the arcade option, which sees you taking on several fighters and getting rewarded by completing it with individual endings and unlocks such as hidden fighters. As well as arcade, you've got your standard versus mode for 2 players, as well as a training option that'll help you hone your skills with your chosen fighter. Now, visually, for a game that released quite early in the PlayStation's life cycle, Critical Blow is quite impressive. Although the action takes place on a 2D plane, each character is represented in 3D, with a surprising amount of detail being afforded to each of them. This same attention to detail was carried over to the stages themselves, which range dramatically in their presentation. From city rooftops to the cool and breezy countryside, there's plenty of diversity on offer, which only elevates each playthrough. On the whole, it's by no means one of the best fighting games on the PlayStation 1, but with its solid gameplay, explosive soundtrack, and rewarding replay value, Critical Blow is a must for anyone interested in seeing everything the PlayStation had to offer, especially when it came to fighting games. Gun Gauge is a third-person shooter that's set in a world where an Imperial army have managed to open a door to another dimension and have let the monsters that reside there invade the planet. This is where the player comes in and is offered the choice of one of 4 characters to help change the tide of the invasion. Each of them can strafe, jump, fire their basic weapon, as well as use special weapons, which are powered up by collecting energy items scattered throughout each level. Utilizing all of the options at your disposal is the key to overcoming some of the more challenging moments in the game. game, and these are usually reserved for the boss battles that provide a real bulk of the challenge that Gun Gauge presents. Each of them are meticulously designed and require the player to study their patterns of attack in order to come up with a strategy on the best way to approach each of them. However, one of my favourite aspects of the game is the amount of extras included that helps promote multiple playthroughs to see everything the game has to offer. These come in the form of special flowers that appear throughout each stage, and upon hitting each of them, you're rewarded with behind-the-scenes art galleries, to the ability to play the soundtrack outside of gameplay, as well as the option to select which mission you want to play without having to start from the beginning. Now, each of the 4 characters have their own flowers to collect, so playing through each of them becomes essential to be able to get all of the extras, and with each of the characters playing and controlling differently from one another, it's not something that becomes mundane, as the different playstyles help keep each playthrough feeling fresh. Gun Gauge is by far one of my favourite games on the PlayStation 1, and is something I can fully recommend picking up if you're looking for a new shooter to jump into. 1 is a severely unique and overlooked game that wears its inspiration on its sleeves. The main one being Contra, as it shares the fast and manic gameplay that the series is known for, but instead sees you taking on the role of John Kane, who wakes up with no memory of who or where he is, with his arm encased in some sort of cannon. To top it all off, he doesn't feel any emotions apart from rage, and soon sets out to get to the bottom of what happened and why he finds himself in the circumstances he's in. Now, what sets 1 apart from other games like it is the way it takes this concept of rage and builds the entire gameplay around it. There's no standard health points, weapon upgrades, or leveling up to be found. Your rage itself is your health and weapon power, and it's only affected by 2 different factors: the amount of damage you deal, as well as the amount you receive. The more enemies and objects you blow up, the stronger your cannon gets, and the more your life increases. When you get hit, your life goes down, and so does your attack power. This means that as you advance and take down more enemies, assuming you avoid getting hurt yourself, your power and the pace of the game increases rapidly, until it reaches levels of complete insanity. It's not just your cannon that you have as a means to defend yourself though, as John also has several melee attacks, as well as a super attack that's beholden to your rage meter, which fills each time you score a kill. On top of this, you'll come across secret weapons like flamethrowers and missiles that momentarily increase your destructive power and make the hordes of enemies that come your way all the more manageable. Well, that does it for another video. Keep an eye out for part 2, as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos, and share the show with your friends. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.